Compassion is so much easier when it belongs to someone else's face. Why do we do for others what we wouldn't do for ourselves? Why is it we choose to love and care for others but ourselves? It's love your neighbor, but you are the exception. Why do we treat ourselves as if we are not another human being? It's love your enemies, but yourself. So how do we treat ourselves? Do we even recognize ourselves? How does one gain the courage to confront the self in order to finally start loving and understanding it? Why do we offer such careful attention to others but almost never to ourselves? If a friend said they made a mistake, your response to them would probably be compassionate and caring. But if you made that same mistake, you would deem yourself a failure, having high standards for yourself and never meeting them, and then belittling yourself and putting yourself down. This repeating cycle corrodes the soul. This neglecting of the self often develops into self-hatred, and self-hatred can become an identity. Oftentimes, people believe they deserve punishment because they failed. When one is suffering, it acts like proof that the suffering they experience is due to their own inadequacy to deal and overcome the problems they faced. It can also become justification. This suffering and self-hate can become a home. Everything they have ever known, toxic at being, it gives them a reason to fear change. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. So how do we start to heal? How do we start loving ourselves like how we love others? How do we do for ourselves what we do for others? Self-neglect is a repeated act of treating everyone else's needs with compassion, patience, and understanding, but treating your own needs as inconvenient or undeserving. So what does a person that neglects himself look like? This individual's self-worth is conditional. They only feel valued when they are useful. So when they are not, their self-worth deteriorates. These people are people pleasers due to fear of conflict or abandonment. Self-negligence can also develop into codependency by revolving your identity around reducing others but the self. This can become their purpose, saving others but themselves. Self-negligence also appears when one completely ignores themselves, abandonment of the self, completely ignoring your own needs for another to prevent them from hurting them or them leaving. This person is able to recognize how another person is feeling, but struggle to identify their own feelings, oftentimes developing into not knowing what they want or feel. So now emotions become unknown. So to make it known, it means confronting yourself and being honest with yourself. And the truth is not pleasant, which is why many tend to avoid confronting the self. This can lead to depression and a sense of emptiness. A person can be around friends yet feel unseen because their true self has been hidden from the people around them and themselves. The self can be seen as the person you experience yourself to be in your everyday life, your memories, thoughts, actions, emotions, values, and beliefs. It is the I in you despite the flow of time and despite change. Now let's discuss how the self is seen through some philosophers and a psychologist. This is not going to be a really into detail video since it will be a week-long video. And also, I am not an expert in any of these topics. I just really enjoy this topic. Soren Kierkegaard. The greatest hazard of all is losing oneself, and it can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. The self as a relationship. The self is a relation that relates itself to itself. What Soren Kierkegaard means by this is that the self is not just your body, your thoughts, or your emotions, but it is the relationship with yourself, the understanding and awareness of the type of relation or relationship you have with yourself is what makes the self. So who you choose to become depends entirely on how you confront yourself. So when we are not practicing confrontation, we enter a state of sadness, depression, anxiety, and negative emotions with ourselves. This state Kierkegaard calls despair. Despair is being disconnected from your true self. You can have many good things going on with your life, like a good career, friends, and success, but still be in despair because you are living someone else's life. This type of person says yes to everyone, most times prioritizing the needs of others over their own. They can get hurt, but never speak up, because they are more focused on the feelings of others than themselves. This person never defends themselves, but defends others. This person forgives everyone, but themselves. They do for others what they would not do to themselves. Why? Because they would rather feel the pain than inflict it on others. But this is self-negligence. Are you not a person as well? Aren't you also worthy of forgiveness and love? Everyone else becomes worthy, but you. So the self becomes invisible. This person lives their whole life becoming someone else instead of themselves. This neglecting of the self oftentimes develops into self-hatred. According to Kierkegaard, there are different types of despair. The first one being not knowing you have a self. Someone can spend their entire life never asking themselves, what do I want? Or, who am I? The next type of despair is not wanting to be yourself and refusing to confront yourself and refusing to do what is required to be your true self. This type of person wants a purpose, has ambitions and goals, but fails to act due to avoiding the uncomfortable action required to become that person. Neglecting the self may also develop into self-sabotage. They stay in painful situations, refuse to love because change is frightening. Oftentimes what we fear the most is transformation. We have a responsibility of confronting oneself if we choose to develop a relationship with oneself. But confronting yourself is scary, it's hard, and it often leads to anxiety. According to Kierkegaard, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Anxiety is the dizziness that comes from realizing you are free to choose from endless possibilities. Freedom becomes overwhelming, so many people tend to avoid confronting themselves to escape this feeling of dizziness, oftentimes letting others dictate their lives for them or completely avoiding the self. In trying to avoid anxiety, they also neglect themselves. Self-neglect begins when compassion and love become one-sided. A person extends patience and sacrifice towards others while denying those same qualities to themselves. Over time, this creates an unequal relationship with the self, producing self-sabotage and eventually self-hate. This Kierkegaard calls despair because you have lost yourself. So how does one come to terms in having the courage to confront yourself? One of the greatest battles one will face is not the one against the world, but the one against yourself. People avoid this confrontation due to them being absorbed in careers, relationships, entertainment, and the opinions of others. These can become distractions that prevent you from asking yourself, who am I when everything external is stripped off of me? Confronting yourself is hard, requires courage, because the answer you may obtain while confronting yourself may not be pleasant. Maybe your kindness is motivated by fear of rejection, or that your ambition is fueled by the need for validation, or that your sacrifices for others are attempts to earn love or avoid abandonment. These answers may threaten the identity we have given ourselves. Toxic at being, it feels like home. And to finally heal, we must change. In the concept of anxiety, freedom is terrifying because it introduces us to the responsibility of choice. This can be overwhelming, so we let others and external factors decide for us. Kierkegaard also believes in the self we invent that later become masks. You may become the reliable one or the successful one. So your identity revolves around that. Now feeding into that identity and neglecting the face behind the mask. For Jean-Paul Sartre, he would interpret the self as self-neglect as a way of escaping the burden of being a free and responsible self. Sartre believed that humans do not possess a predetermined purpose. He states that existence precedes the essence. Essence being that what it is for, a purpose, like manufacturing a pencil. And a pencil's fixed purpose is to write. Although it can be used for many things, the design was made for writing. He believed that we exist first, then gradually define ourselves through the choice and action. So if someone is constantly telling themselves that they are naturally like that, or I'm not good at loving myself, or my purpose is to save those people, this identity of self-neglecting is built through repeated actions. Every time they choose someone's needs over their own, they participate in constructing that identity. In this case, the individual constructed a self that is revolving around serving another. In this philosophy, he states that man is condemned to be free. We are free, so we have the burden and responsibility to choose for ourselves. And we are condemned because we did not choose to exist. But yet we do. So now we bear the responsibility of choosing how to live. In this case, freedom creates responsibility and oftentimes anguish. A person that is constantly self-neglecting may try to escape this responsibility by letting others decide for them. Like I stayed because I had no other choice. Although the circumstance comes with real pressure towards the individual. Sartre's point is that however pressure you feel, it does not erase the agency. The person still responds to the situation and thereby chooses what the meaning will be. What Sartre identifies as bad faith is denying that you are free. Bad faith is a complicated form of self-deception. When the person says I can't choose or I had to, underneath this statement can be avoiding the experience of guilt, uncertainty, and responsibility that would be when choosing yourself. For example, self-negligence according to views would be, I have to answer their calls. This may be concealing the fear of becoming unnecessary, or I forgive everyone, may conceal the fear of conflict, or I don't need anything, may conceal dependency, or this is who I am, can protect you and can protect the person from having the responsibility of transformation. Sartre gives us an example of a cafe waiter who behaves too much like a waiter. His gestures are excessive and theatrical. He says that he is playing at being a waiter. The problem here is that he acts as if his role in being a waiter completely defines his being, as if he was a thing designed to perform one function. What Sartre speaks on can relate to self-neglect. A self-neglecting person can perform the same existential act by becoming a role while neglecting the self, like becoming the rescuer but not rescuing the self, becoming the perfect partner, the dependable one, or the strong one who does not need help. In doing so, and becoming the role of the strong one, when this facade breaks or is challenged, the identity that is behind the role will leak out, causing one to confront the self, because none of the dependable gestures done for others could be done to the self. So we put the mask away as a way to defend ourselves. This function gives a sense of being needed. If I am needed, then I matter. Bad faith occurs when one denies facticity, which is the facts already present in our lives, like our past, body, childhood, and circumstance, and transcendence, our ability to move beyond what is given in the present by imagining and pursuing new outcomes. A self-neglecting person might identify with facticity. I was raised this way. I cannot live any differently. Or I've been through this. Anything that comes after that will show the same result. Here, the self-neglecting individual may treat their history as some sort of fate, like if they are destined to repeat the same outcomes as their past encounters. According to Jean-Paul Sartre, Overcoming self-neglect begins by recognizing that self-neglect is a continuing choice through which you define yourself. By overcoming your bad faith, according to Sartre, one can finally confront the self. Instead of saying, I have no choice, one could say, I am choosing this, although it may frighten me. Freedom creates anguish, because every choice you make for yourself closes possibilities, and it carries consequences, whether good or bad. So by accepting the anguish that comes in choosing yourself, one can finally grow and heal. Self-neglect feels safe because it provides a ready-made purpose to take care of everyone else, or a fixed role. But by overcoming this, it means accepting uncertainty and facing yourself. Self-neglect, according to Sartre, cannot be overcome by finding your true self. Since the self is continuously being produced through your actions, it begins by constructing a different self when you ask for help, accept care without repaying it, and say no without an excuse. This declaration means, I am not an instrument for other people's lives. If every person deserves love, you cannot logically exclude yourself from humanity. The person abandons their experience to preserve belonging. Carl Horney was a psychologist that believed that self-neglect became an interpersonal strategy for obtaining and maintaining safety. In her words, self-erasure becomes an interpersonal strategy for obtaining safety. She believed that a person can become loving, humble, and attentive while becoming inwardly alienated from themselves. A self-neglecting person may be less about lacking needs and more about believing that expressing those needs will threaten love, safety, and belonging. Karen believed that unhealthy personality patterns often begin with basic anxiety. A child's feelings of being helpless and isolated in the world experienced as hostile or cruel. This can develop when care is conditional, controlling, humiliating, and emotionally unavailable. The child then learns that openly expressing disappointment or independence may endanger the connection between them, so the child may reach a conclusion that the only way to feel connected and seen is by becoming what others need. This can be the beginning of self-neglect, when the attention is redirected outward and starting to monitor other people instead of themselves, asking questions like, are they angry? What will make them happy or keep the peace? Who do I have to become accepted? Karen Horney also describes 3 ways of dealing with anxiety. In her book, Our Inner Conflicts, Horney describes 3 strategies. The first strategy is moving towards people. This strategy revolves around seeking safety, comfort, approval, and dependence through other people. The second strategy is moving against people. This strategy is trying to maintain and seek safety through control, power, and superiority over others. And the third strategy is moving away from people, seeking safety through distance, independence, detachment, and emotional withdrawal from another. Horney argues that neurotic people become governed by their inner commands for others. This she called the tyranny of the shoulds. For a self-neglecting person, the person does not say, I am tired, I need rest. But they say, a better person would not be tired right now. They neglect themselves. They put themselves down. They do something they wouldn't do to another. They don't say, I need help, but say, if I wasn't so weak, I wouldn't need help. I need to be stronger. The self-neglecting person believes they are not worthy or should not feel emotions like anger or sadness. However, these emotions do not disappear and may return as depression, exhaustion, or disappointment. A person can say, I don't ever ask anything from anyone, while suffering in secret because nobody gave them what they needed. Oftentimes, this person creates a silent vow with another. I will take care of you without you asking, but in return, I expect the same. But the vow is hardly ever fulfilled, so the person feels used. But in them, expressing how they feel will threaten the relationship and their identity of being the loving person. So, the anger is then redirected towards themselves. The self-neglecting person, according to Horney, may develop dependency upon being loved. The other person becomes evidence that they hold value. But this creates several fears, like if the individual establishes a boundary, they may leave, or if they disagree, they may reject them. Oftentimes, with a self-neglecting individual, when losing someone, they may think, I lost the proof that I deserve love. Horny is not saying that kindness and sacrifice are unhealthy, but the problem is, would you still choose that act if you knew the person would love you even if you said no? If the answer is otherwise, the motivation behind that behavior may be because due to dependency, insecurity, and fear, rather than freely chosen love. Because love is free, regardless of the outcome. You love someone, despite them being mad, because it wasn't the outward experience that you fell in love with, but their soul. According to Horny, healing does not mean becoming selfish. It means returning to the real self. By the real self, she means listening to your feelings. The real self, according to Horny, will be genuine feelings, choices, and growth. This can look like noticing your personal feelings without judging them right away. Being able to distinguish desire from obligation that are persuaded by fears. It could also look like asking for help or making room for independence and connection. The goal is to be able to care for someone because you choose to, not because your identity and emotional security depend on it. For Kierkegaard, it was the individual despairingly refusing to become themselves, not knowing they have a self and refusing the confrontation of becoming the self. So we cling on to others for security, as if we are trying to prove a point. The point being that, are we worthy of being happy and loved? For Sartre, it was the individual hiding their freedom inside a mask, a role, a character. It's so much easier to become the task you are given and build an identity around it, because when you finally confront yourself, the harsh reality sets in. It is uncomfortable, but it must be done. Avoiding responsibility to choose for ourselves, are we deliberately sabotaging our own freedom by becoming a slave to the things that bring us security, even if it corrodes us? For Horny, it was the individual who uses love, compassion, sacrifice with others in order to maintain security, a dependence that was built on other people. This can not only be applied to people, but to tasks, roles, jobs, and hobbies, as if we depend on these things to give us life, as an excuse to permit ourselves to say, I deserve to live. It takes courage to confront yourself, and courage begins with honesty. Being honest with yourself. If you confront yourself and admit, I am afraid, I seek approval, and I am responsible for my own suffering. These admissions hurt, but they destroy the comforting illusions you gave yourself to protect you from becoming the self you are capable of becoming. Kierkegaard, Sartre, and Horny demonstrate to us that self-neglect is an existential refusal and a psychological defense to prevent from showing the self. A self-neglecting individual neglects themselves not because they lack a self, but because expressing that self is scary and dangerous. Because if I show who I truly am, will I be accepted? What if they leave? What if they stop loving me? This becomes dependence on others to ensure security and emotional comfort. This condition requires courage to confront oneself and accept responsibility for one's choices, and tolerate the anxiety and fear that comes with no longer clinging to others to be worthy of love. To recognize yourself is to recognize that you are also an individual, the way you see others, that you also require gentleness, love, and patience. The individual who consistently does for others what they would never do for themselves, creating imbalance in their relationship with the self. They forgive others but withhold forgiveness from themselves. They recognize humanity of everyone except their own. In Kierkegaard's terms, this is not merely low self-esteem, it is a fractured relationship with the self. The courage to confront oneself begins when one asks the difficult question, why do I believe what others deserve the compassion that I deny myself? Becoming yourself, it is a relationship that must be continually cultivated. Every honest decision you make for yourself strengthens that relationship, and every act of deceiving yourself regresses it. It's a lifelong process. You are reaching out a broken hand to others, not realizing that you were the one that needed healing all along.